All right. In front of me, I have the five books of the Malazan core series, I guess you could say, the ones that are written just from Steven Erickson, even though he's written some side short stories and side series that kind of are tangential to this main series. I've read the main ones and one of the other ones. So, or actually, that's not true. I've read the novellas and I've read one of Ian C. Esselmon's. So, if you haven't read Malazan before, I want to give my pitch again. I've given lots of pitches for Malazan, but I've been doing my reread, and I'm just reminded how amazing it is. Um, if you you know you've if you've looked into what anyone has said about their recommendation for reading Malazan and whatnot, is a lot of people will say you got to get through the second book, or a lot of people say you got to get to the third book because you know a lot of people will be hooked by the ending of the second book, but it can not a lot of people can not be as much of a fan of the first part of the book, and it's a pretty big book. So, um, but it's the third book where people will often say that's where it's gonna be amazing for you. But that also makes people read, trust you enough to read two books, both of which are kind of longish, uh, in hopes that you're going to be hooked by the third book. Like you're asking them to read a whole trilogy and maybe not be so sure for two long books, and that's kind of crazy. So I want to put my pitch a little bit in a non-spoilery way, I hope, for kind of what is the reason why the third book is so special for a lot of people, and kind of what to expect, because there is a major shift in focus and structure and general pacing and foreshadowing that is very different in the third book than in the first two, even though I love the first two. But I understand maybe why some people would bow out of the first book and the second book. Now, just if you'll indulge me, to kind of tell you what you might expect from this journey, from the first book to the third book, uh, you know, it jumps around. It jumps around from to different continents, which there already is this. These are massive books, so that's a challenge. But it also throws at you a lot of characters and a lot of places, and that can feel kind of like a challenge. And it's 10 massive books of tons and tons of people. And so you gotta know that your page count, if you have a average page count target, reading goal, and it forces you to really push yourself in reading fast, you got to kind of maybe not approach it that way, because it's going to force you to kind of pay extra attention, I think. Like doing this book is very difficult. I started doing some audiobook by the Bone Hunters, and I was understanding it much less, and my enjoyment went way down in that one. And so that's a part of why I'm doing the reread, because I want to remedy that I did that. But like there's just a lot going on. And so, the first book, we start on a place called Genebacus, this continent here. We have the name Malazan is for this empire, the Malazan Empire. And we start the series, we start at the very, very, very first chapter. We're kind of, or in the prologue or whatever, we are reacting to this change. The emperor's dead, and we have a new empress that has taken the throne or whatever. There's this crazy thing happening in the city, and this is kind of what's happening anyway. And so the Malazan Empire has spread out to these different continents. And in some places, they are doing very well. in spreading and kind of getting into the economy and, having these different dynamics with the locals. Some of the locals in these places do not like them being there at all. And so in the second book, it's kind of that sort of thing where the Malazan Empire is a little bit on its heels. Um, but sorry, I'm jumping around. The first book, you kind of are jumping right into this engagement with the Malazans and some of the locals, and you don't really know what to make of like why they're even fighting. And so it's hard to take a side when you see just kind of the aftermath of what's going on. And that's a part of why book one is a little tricky. It was tricky for me is because I didn't really, I had my characters I guess I was rooting for, but on a grand scheme of things, there wasn't like a evil emperor that we were going against. Like it was just sort of a strange, it was a strange book, which I loved so much more the second time when I knew the context, but not the easiest maybe intro to the series when you consider the later books and just how you're so ready to go. Like early on, you're hooked into what's happening. And in the first book, maybe it does have something in the air with the first book where you, like, when I first read it, I didn't understand everything, but there's something in the air, which it was like something interesting is in this series, even though I don't really understand it. And you have to understand also that a reason why we say to get to the third book is because you start to understand things more. And we have to almost say, you got to kind of push through two books, maybe not knowing the bigger picture as much as you would like to know it. But it doesn't mean you're going to be so confused in the books that like you don't know, you still have your characters that are trying to do things and you understand that, we want them to succeed. But the first book, it's a little bit of a messy intro that I think is still an amazing book on a reread. But again, not very easy. Second book starts off with such a bang, but it's a totally different cast. It has such an amazing ending. But the first part of the book, which is a big chunk, is a little bit like a Oregon Trail, where we have people trying to cross the continent safely before they're going to be killed for who they are. And that's a big part of the book, which has an amazing conclusion, but it can be a little boring for people. There are other things in the book, these other POVs that are tragic and quite dark, but also pretty, there's some pretty amazing moments in the battles and in like intro to such good characters, but it's a different vibe than the first book. Very, very different vibe. So then you get to the third book. Where the heck did I put it? Oh. You get to the third book, Memories of Ice, and this is where I decided to start doing videos in Malazan because I just thought this is such an amazing series. I'm going to start just talking about it. And I started writing in the margins like crazy. Like I was really loving it. And a part of the reason I think is because there are a few things that happen by book 3. I think it is you have a threat. Like you have a clear threat or a couple main threats or a couple main individuals that you clearly don't want to win what they're doing. And that makes a big difference because, having a Darth Vader, imagine Star Wars if you didn't really have, you didn't really know who to root for. And book 3 definitely gives you that. So we have this Panian threat. And another reason why I was thinking to even do this is because in another series that I am reading, the Sun Eater series, we have this threat that kind of reminds me of the Panion threat a little bit. Uh, and a big reason why the third book is just so exciting. But you could kind of picture them, and it would be kind of maybe some very minimal spoilers, but I think we kind of know early on what they're like. But people have there's just like this. Imagine like the Zerg, what is that, in StarCraft or whatever, where they're just gobbling up cities. And there are these cities kind of getting gobbled up, for lack of a better word. They're going dark, right? And this scourge is just covering this initial continent we are on for book one. And it's just kind of the interesting thing about all this series, and it's here with book three, like, we have all these threats that are so different from one another, and they're all found in the same series. Sometimes you go through a series and it's so formulaic and it's the same enemies each time, but this is just so amazing. We have the Scourge in book three, and you could think of them as like they've just become rabid, these people. Becoming cannibals, and we can only dream about what it's going to be like when we come in contact with this scourge that is so talked about and so feared, and is just the scariest thing ever. And then when it comes to a head, it's just the most exciting. From that point on, clear to the end of the book, is just amazing. And not only that, like, you get so many great things to think about. Like, a lot of what I've written down or highlighted are things that really got me. That were, just showed the sensibility, I think, more of Steven Erikson. Like, the first two books intellectually, like, they tell a great story and they are emotional, but the little moments, maybe from Memories of Ice and on, you get to see how he kind of takes you down low into dark moments, but also dark emotionally in a way, because he takes us to the highest heights after, and takes us to the darkest darks to get to the lightest lights in this series. And it's just amazing. I mean, I have all the books in front of me. Book 4, we get back to the place with the Oregon Trail or whatever, but it's a very, very different book than that first one. But such a great follow-up to it. Sometimes the follow-ups to the first outing with characters is terrible, and I can say that I don't think that ever happens here, which says a lot. Book 5, we get totally different characters. We get one of my very favorite characters that I thought was going to be my favorite throughout, and I can't wait to get to the reread to get back to him and the other characters in that part. Again, the Bone Hunters were on the last 4, but they're massive. Oh, I don't have Reaper's Gale with me. Yeah, I'll just, whatever. We have the Bone Hunters again. I started to listen a little bit with audiobook, getting a little impatient, and that kind of spoiled the experience. So, big reason I'm doing the reread is to not do that again. We have Reaper's Gale, which was amazing, one of my favorite books ever, but my very favorite of the series for sure is Toll the Hounds, which is a conclusion to, I think, my favorite continent storyline in the series. Then we have the last 2, which was, in retrospect, much more of an epic conclusion than I gave it credit for on the first read. So, obviously, I think, I'm doing my missionary work, trying to spread the good word that people should read this series and allow themselves to go slow enough and to enjoy the process enough of just sitting back and enjoying what it has to give you. Um, I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing. And I think that's a reason why there's such an active community. You can find them on Reddit and on Discords and all sorts of things. But we obviously think you should read it and not be so nervous about the big, what can appear to be a big ask, but I can assure you that you'll start to get it and you'll be fine. You know, even though you don't get the biggest picture as much as you would like to, you really don't get that until like book 10. Like there's always something you don't know about the big picture that we are uncovering, right? And there's podcasts at the end of sub books and whole books, like, discussions to help you get back on board if you kind of fell off for certain little subplots and things. There's wikis and whatnot. So anyway, come read Malazan, right? As I'm getting through, as I get near the end of Memories of Ice, um, I'll give my full review, I guess, again on each of these books, because man, they deserve it. So I guess subscribe for that if you'd like.